Hello, welcome to Future Foodcast. We're a group of industry experts, food enthusiasts, and food technologists talking all about the future of food. Future Foodcast is sponsored by Farm to Plate, the brainchild of Paramount Software Solutions. Farm to Plate is a software company committed to creating tomorrow's food business ecosystem today. On today's podcast, I'm going to be interviewing a really fun guest. We have Dan Dickinson from Arterra Wines Canada, and I want to welcome him to our podcast today. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, we are glad to have you. You know, as CIO, some of us know what that is, but I think at Arterra, you've kind of made that your own title as far as description wise. Why don't you tell us all that you do? Because I think it's a lot more than people might be thinking.
Yeah, sure. Those three letters are doing some heavy lifting, I think, in this case. So formally my title is Executive Vice President of Technology and Digital, which kind of sound like the same thing, but in this case, they're not. So I handle both, the core technology things you'd think about for any company, the networks, the systems that our employees use, the ERP behind the scenes. But also part of what I came to do was lead the digital transformation at Arterra. And so all the things that entails, most of which don't actually have that much to do with technology. So I'm covering both of those things, and we just sometimes simplify it and call it CIO.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, we do talk about the future of food, but there's a lot of technology going on with the future of food. So as far as digital transformation, I think our audience might be really interested to know, what kind of form is that taking for you at Arterra?
Yeah, it's kind of a multi-year answer, really, if we think about it. So my primary objective right now, or my first objective, I would say, is mostly about getting direct to consumer. So versus going through the kind of large provincial regulated boards that sell most of the wine for us today, going direct to consumer in the ways that we always had by selling through estates and through our own retail stores, now actually getting direct to consumer through online and mobile is an increasingly big part of our business. And so that's job one. But if I think about where this can go and where this gets really interesting, especially as the son of a farmer, thinking about how we apply technology and digital thinking in the viticulture process, in the winemaking process, in the production facilities, even more than we are today. So where that can go and where we're seeing really interesting use cases around the world, all over ag tech, is really starting to come to bear in wine as well. And that is really the intersection of my passions of wine and nerdery around technology. So I'm pretty excited about it.
It sounds like the perfect job for you, but let's back up a little bit for our audience, because you are in Canada. Mm-hmm. And so that direct to consumer piece of it is a little bit different. If you could explain for our listeners what the regulations look like in Canada, because we have all different countries listening to us.
Sure. Yeah. And just to level set, so we have 10 provinces and 3 territories, and each of the 10 provinces in Canada of various sizes have their own one large kind of government-owned, seller of liquor. And so we work obviously very directly with them. Some provinces have some private systems as well, but by and large, that's where most of our wine sales go through. So whether it's wine that we ourselves produce and grow here in Canada and sell, or brands that we represent here in Canada, like Robert Mondavi or Kim Crawford, that come, from around the world. So that's been I would say the de facto. That's how most of the sales have happened. As we've been looking at going direct to consumer, there's the added wrinkle of all of these regulations are provincial. So what you can ship from what to which province to what is sort of a kind of a 10 column by 10 row grid that you have to figure out. So it's, being careful to make sure that whatever you're doing still has to line up, obviously, to the regulations. Yeah. And your systems have to be able to accommodate that. And so that's been part of the complexity with what we're building and building that flexibility in.
Yeah, it is just a little bit more an extra check. You have to make sure that you're falling within the regulations. And I know every country has regulations, but I just wanted you to explain how Canada's worked and the whole B2C, because it is centralized in a lot of aspects. And like you said, Arterra has a bit of a hybrid. You have your own wineries and wine that you grow, manufacture, and and sell. And then you also bring in other makers' wine that you distribute for them.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And so that complexity is it all has to be managed, and ultimately it all hits an ERP in the back end. So that system has to kind of flex for all these different needs. But it really was designed for this B2B world, where things are sort of daily batch and warehouse to warehouse. And so what we're looking at doing as we go more direct to consumer and responding to real-time needs is, how do you maybe insulate some of that legacy and still give the consumer the experience they want to actually get a bottle of wine show up on their doorstep.
Right, because we consumers do want the bottles of wine to show up at our doorsteps.
We do. Indeed, we do. Especially during the pandemic, that really accelerated this, where we saw reduced store hours and people weren't going to restaurants. What we definitely saw, and that seems to have shifted the consumer demand probably permanently, is how do I get, instead of ordering a case that shows up 5 days from now, how do I maybe get 2 bottles or 4 bottles that show up, in 30 minutes, right? So that's been a shift that we've had to adapt to.
Yeah, Dan, I don't think you're alone in that. I think we as consumers it was all accelerated. We may have gotten here eventually. Worldwide pandemic certainly accelerated our use of, and also I will say acceptance of, kind of the whole order and delivery thing. Some of us just love to, I'm not one of them, but some love to be the shopper and going out there and looking at everything that's available, even walking through the liquor store to see and read all about the different wines or whatever they're going to be buying, spirits. And I'm not one of them. I'm great with ordering online. I was an early adopter, but I've seen people that did not do it now do, and got so used to it that they really like it. They realize they're willing to pay a little more for some delivery or for the product in order to have it show up at their doorstep. Sounds like you're seeing the same thing with your consumers.
Absolutely. And trying to figure out how, if that's the need, how do you provide what they've always felt in that retail experience? So I live in Ontario. The store here is called the LCBO, and they've done frankly a really fantastic job of, giving that selection on the shelves and helping guide people to what they might like. And I've seen that in various provinces that I've visited. So how do you take that education part or the breadth and bring that to a digital medium where it might be on a phone? It's one thing if it's a convenience order and I get the same thing every week. It's another thing if I want to explore, well, I've tried Spanish wine, maybe I want Portuguese wine. So how do you help kind of bring the customer through that journey? Or I like Cabernet Sauvignon, maybe I also like Cabernet Franc. So how do you help them through that journey that might be a little bit more natural in a retail state? So that really is part of the task, I think, of any digital, product owner or a person trying to guide that journey. And it's not new to this industry. I worked in banking before. It was the exact same thing. How do you explain complex products to people in a more constrained format and medium? So I'm trying to bring those lessons to bear here as well on something as infinitely complex and interesting as wine.
That's true. That customer experience is an interesting nut to crack as far as trying to figure out how to duplicate that, like you were saying, online in the digital space. And I think about virtual reality or something like simulating, kind of looking at the bottle and being able to see what's there. I'm sure that you're geeking out over all the possibilities that there are.
Yeah, no, exactly. If you think about the possibilities that augmented reality give you, for example, we've certainly seen examples in the past of using AR generated by the wine bottle labels themselves. Even as simple as getting a QR code on the back of all the labels that actually points you to, where is this wine made? Show me a video of the winemaker actually talking about the winemaker, or talking about if it's a single vineyard bottle, tell me about the vineyard. In a lot of cases, people do want to know that, or what's the backstory or the history, or where do I go from here? If I like this, what else might I like? So it still relies on the consumer to pick up the bottle and have that interest level. But what we're seeing is, by and large, that's almost always there. I mean, if you're drinking a bottle in a restaurant, you're like, what is this? I have to know more about it. Mm-hmm. Making it as easy as you can for them to find out, more about this wine. Where do I get it? Navigate through the regulations that allow it to get onto your doorstep. And in our case, hopefully, get it there really quickly.
Yeah. So there are lots of opportunities for you with your CIO hat on and the consumer facing products that you're trying to develop and how you're going to interact with them. But you also mentioned part 2 of what you were talking about in your role, kind of those internal analytics, because you also are a producer, a grower and a manufacturer and a producer. and distribute your own. So I would love to hear, because there's a lot of movement with analytics in the growing, and you talk about the vineyards. Share with us some of the things that are going on there.
Yeah, I mean, and I should preface this by saying I am more of a technologist, and I'm certainly not a viticulturalist, so I can't speak to the exact science behind this. But I'm also the son of a farmer and a wine nerd, so we'll leave it there. This is an amateur's opinion of what's happening here, but it's really interesting to think about all the metrics that these the people tending the vines and the people looking after them year after year and doing the pruning and then thinking about them through harvest and worrying about frost. And obviously in Canada, the temperature and the climate can be a challenge for growing certain grapes. And so understanding what's happening in the vineyard from moment to moment is crucial. And the viticulturist, like most farmers, will probably just have an innate sense of what the temperature is. But, this starts to get really interesting when you're looking at vineyards that maybe, a really big vineyard might be very different at the end closest to Lake Ontario, which, has a sort of a microclimate effect of its own, than the one at the far, the vines at the grapes at the far end. Or if the vineyard on a slope is going to be very different at the bottom of that slope than it is at the top. The drainage is different. The deposits, the glacial deposits that are probably there are different. Half a degree of difference in the temperature can be the difference between frost or not. So I think as we think about ways to gather data that tell us about what's going on in the vineyards, let alone operations or the winemaking side, I haven't even talked about inside the tanks or the barrels yet, but even just in the vineyards themselves, understanding the temperature, the wind speed, even the soil itself, kind of that might change over time. And certainly in recent years, one of the things we found we have to pay a lot of attention to is smoke taint from forest fires. And certainly this has obviously been very common in California. We've seen a lot of this in Australia, and we own wineries and vineyards in the Okanagan Valley, which have suffered from this in the past few years. And so being aware of that as we kind of learn how that affects the grapes, it's been very important. So trying to be able to detect things like this in real time, the viticulturalist can't be everywhere all at once. And so having that data that can feed back and let them react to it is something where I'd say early piloting, here and there, but haven't rolled out super broadly. And so, if you think about the kind of data that can give you and the reactions you can have to that, we're really excited about the potential that offers. Like I said, let alone what happens inside the actual winery when we're waiting for the actual wine process to complete itself over multiple years.
Yeah, well, let's jump into that in a minute. But from the farmer perspective or the vintner perspective, give me the correct terminology to use. The brain children that are out there with all this knowledge that they've been working in the vineyards for years and years, and they just intuitively know certain things. And, it's hard to think about giving them what they intuitively find out, to get them to verbalize what exactly is it, what comes together here. Is it the wind, the air, the smoke is very obvious, but there's a lot of other things that happen in those little microclimates, like you said, that might be in different parts of the vineyard, depending on how large it is, and certainly across Canada where you grow.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, very, very different. And as I said, even within the regions, the south end of the Okanagan Valley, where it's not desert, but it's semi-arid scrub, is very different than in the north end of the valley. And the bottom of the valley floor is very different than the top, right? And so again, to the point of not being able to be everywhere all at once, having that data come in and maybe point them to maybe which grapes need to be harvested earlier than others, maybe which ones, because all those factors you mentioned, the temperature, the degree days, so how much sunlight they've gotten over how long, all those things factor into when the grapes are ready to be picked, right, and ready to be harvested. And so being able to predict what the Brix level, the sugar level in the grape is, all these things, what we've seen from the folks that are out doing this, the more data they have at their fingertips, the better. Their intuition's usually right, but I think they won't turn away data if they have it. So yeah, having that data about the differences even within the vineyards or the regions, and certainly across Canada where we have very, very different climates in the different, grape growing areas where we grow is incredibly important.
Yeah. So fast forward, I'd be excited if I were them, because it's really a confirmation of what they're already making decisions. And then they can look at the data to confirm that. And that could potentially save your company a lot of money making the wrong decision about when to harvest or which grapes are ready. Just to have that double confirmation, now logging in technology wise. We have two-factor authentication everywhere. It's kind of like two-factor authentication within the grape harvesting to know how to best, or, what needs to happen with them. I think that's really exciting. So once you move from, I guess, and I also fast forward in my brain to having all this data, that mega data, once you have years of data and the outcomes of those, because then you'll know, here's what we made decision-wise based on this data, and here's what kind of grape we got and what kind of wine we were able to make. And then you can, with all of that, looking back when you get forward, talking about future food, you'll be able to go back and maybe duplicate some of those more popular wines that you were able to produce, because that's the science of it, right?
It is, and it depends on even on the type of wine that we're selling. So some wines that we sell, people want the exact same thing in that bottle year after year, vintage after vintage. I think as you get to maybe, in my case, the nerdier end of the wine collectors, you kind of want variation. You kind of want to do what that year told you to do, right? So there's not that much intervention in a lot of cases in those wines. You want it to tell you what the soil and even the air told you that year. And so I think that's, but to your point, I mean, there's some cases where that's absolutely what we'd be trying to do is kind of keep that consistency year over year and adjust and maybe pick earlier or later, or change the mix of a blend or that sort of thing, right? So again, they do that incredibly well and very intuitively today, but there's so much effort that goes into that. And again, arming them with more data to be able to do that just seems like, that's the least I can do, I think. So as I mentioned today, they're doing this in limited pilots anyway, but I'd love to see that scale. But that's the interesting part. To scale that technology isn't something that our core system was contemplated to ever do. Years ago when we turned it on, it was never thought about live, streaming telemetric data coming in from the vineyards in that sort of volume. And so that's a challenge that I'll have to take that and turn that into actionable intelligence that the viticulture and winemakers can use.
Well, and I think it's okay as long as those that are involved in the intuitive and more art part of it are feeling like the science is supporting them rather than overriding them. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely.
Cooperation, because
100%. I mean, the winemakers and the folks working in the vineyards, I mean, they know, they kick the dirt, they sniff it, they look at the plants, they touch them every day. I mean, they know that the data is a support mechanism to them. But again, as the son of a farmer, I would never dare to actually suggest that the data should tell them what to do. So much of their heart and soul is in the dirt and in the vines, and then inside the actual winery itself. It's their passion that brings it to life every year. So I'm, all I can hope to be is a supplement to that.
Great. Well, it sounds like you're doing a good job supplying that, but let's move inside of the winery when you get to actually making the wine, and tell us what's going on in that area.
Yeah, a few things. So, the production facilities, if they're white wines that are made in season, they go kind of, pretty quickly into the bottle. And then depending on how long we age them, that's, there's a whole barrel management aspect that kind of happens there. And then because we're blending wine from all over the world, even that is controlled inside our ERP. So we actually have a wine blending module that actually helps the winemakers keep track of, what's in this tank. So much of what's in this tank goes into this bottle and this bottle. And then, then even the bottling systems themselves they look like spaceships now. So the data that we can get from those about the efficiency of the line and the error rate and things like that are all things that, again, more data that we can pick up to feed our operations team, which they love. They're a very data-driven bunch, those folks. So once it comes inside in the production facilities, again, more data that we can feed them, including even things like how full is the tank, kind of radar sensors, detecting how full the tank is, or if there's anything bad happening in there, if you see temperature move where it's not supposed to move, or carbon dioxide levels, so you can kind of figure out all these different things that can maybe use sensors to feed back, which again, they're detecting on a pretty regular basis anyway, but in the spirit of you can't be everywhere. It's again, another bit of help that maybe we can provide it someday.
Yeah, you can't be everywhere, and much more efficient to be able to have the data put up into a dashboard for the person who knows that maybe used to manually go measure some of those things, to be able to look at it and then go where there needs to be change. But you can have status quo with the other things. I just think that's a really efficient use of that person's brain power, the information they need. Let's talk about the making consumers happy. So what's Arterra Wines' planning in the future? We didn't talk about, you have stores all across the country.
All across Ontario. Yeah.
Ontario.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're looking to expand.
Yeah. So that getting that direct consumer relationship really is the focus, right? And it's getting back to our roots. I'd say, we have the oldest estate winery in the country, which is Inniskillen, and still world renowned and fantastic winery. And all of our wineries established themselves by, creating those connections with customers as they walked in, or as they had a bottle in a restaurant and wanted to go check it out. And they went to learn about it and fell in love with it and joined the wine club. And have been loyal customers for some of them, 10, 20 years. And so really establishing that connection in a more digital world is sort of the tricky part. And how do you use technology to reach them in times, again, like during the pandemic, when you can't get to them otherwise, or it's more difficult to get to them. And so that's really been a focus for us, is how do you bring these, not just the wines themselves, but even the vineyards and the winemakers, how do you bring their stories forward and help people feel really, connected? Because a lot of our market here in Ontario is in Toronto, which is 1 to 2 hours away from the growing regions like Prince Edward County and Niagara, and it's really close, but it can feel far. And so we want to remind people that we sit in the middle of this amazing wine producing region that makes, in my opinion, incredibly underrated, globally competitive wines, and we should be proud of them. And we want to really bring that back to the forefront. So not just make it an e-commerce experience, but to help educate people about this is the amazing stuff that's coming from just around the lake that you really should understand more about, because it's kind of like magic, if you ask me. I'm a little romantic about wine, I think, but it's this incredibly complex living thing, and it's just such a privilege really to be able to use technology to try to get more people into this story and understand it, and to understand what's there. So certainly it's that desire is going to come into effect. It's always been in the estates. They've always been just amazing ambassadors of the wines when you visit the actual wine estates. But yeah, we have over 100 retail stores in Ontario. We're obviously trying to, I'd say, repair and improve the online experience that we've got with our customers, and that's a nationwide thing. Again, with the caveat that you have to be careful about what you can ship where. But we want to bring that to more consumers across Canada and the provinces where we can do it. So we've got such a great story to tell in so many different brands that we think appeal to so many people. That's how do you make this a digestible and understandable experience and journey for people, and get them the products that they love.
Well said. And I also think that the people want to know the story. We consumers are more and more want to know where our wines have come from, like you were saying. Did I read on your website that you actually have winemaking kits or some ability for consumers to try it out themselves?
We do. We have a winemaking kit business. We actually sell to other companies that then have the facilities where you'd go and sort of do this. And it's, I think, it's the oldest part of the company, actually. But yeah, so we actually have all the way from that to the $600 a bottle cab that comes from California. So we kind of have the entire journey, depending on how you want to interact with wine, how you want to make your own. Like, we kind of enable that kind of through a B2B mechanism. If you want to try the sort of entry level, if you're kind of getting introduced to the world of wine, it's there. If you're a hardcore collector and you want the double diamond that just won all the awards, or you want Schrader, it's there for you, right? So it's really amazing to be able to help if they want to go on that journey. I mean, we can take them pretty far on that journey. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great way to meet the consumer experience need. I mean, they're asking for it. And I didn't realize it was one of the oldest parts, or the oldest part of your company. That's really cool. So our listeners and viewers in Canada, check out Arterra Wines and get your winemaking kit, or check out their stores, because it sounds like they're really wanting to partner with you. And Dan, is there anything else you want to share with our audience before we go today? You told us the whole story about Arterra, and it's a really great one. I loved hearing it.
I think I've been here for about 18 months after spending 20 odd years in the banking industry. And I have to say, this is quite a bit more interesting, or at least fun on a regular basis. But what's really been fantastic, banking, again, this very ancient thing that has now had a technology lens put on it, and wine, an even more ancient thing that now has a technology lens being put on it. And it's all in service of doing this very kind of ancient and historied thing, really. And I think the balance is to, help improve people's understanding of it and love of it, when it can be sometimes an overwhelming category to get into. It's not a simple category. It can be, but it can also be this beautifully complex thing to get into. And that really is how we're trying to use technologies to help pull people into this world where they can kind of feel immersed in it if they want, and really enjoy it to whichever degree they feel is right for them. So it's been a fun journey. And this is how I love using technology. It's never technology for technology's sake. It's how do I help a consumer tomorrow? And this, it's a fun thing to try to do.
Yeah. And you have totally romanticized the business of winemaking for me today. So I hope you did that for our listeners as well. I'm just intrigued and want to know more. I really enjoyed hearing the story about Arterra, and I appreciate you being here. I also want to thank our sponsor, Farm to Plate, a software company enabling better food supply chain management. You can find out more at farmtoplate.io. I'm Pam Line-Miller, and we'll talk to you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to Future Foodcast. Future Foodcast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.